Are we live? Or are we dead?
If we are, I don't
we're
see
dead.
it.
Are we live? Are we dead? Or are we somewhere in between? The important questions of life coming up right now. No, we're not alive. We're dead.
Yeah, I see the video now.
Yeah. It's live.
Okay.
Oh, cool! And there's the little chat thingy on the side.
No, some random geek. We're dead. Okay, we're just talking to you from hell.
There's a difference between mostly dead and all dead.
I mean, we're dead on the inside of this capitalistic monstrosity.
If they're all the way dead, then there's only one thing you can do, and that's search their pockets for spare coins.
I mean, what is it? You work 9 to 5. You're pretty much dead already. You're in the hands of the capitalists. Sorry, this is a polytheism time, not a socialist time.
Take back the means of production.
It is possible that you are both alive and dead. Exactly, Schrodinger's cat. I don't know if you're alive, Thomas. You could actually be dead. So
Schrodinger's life.
Exactly. Thomas is actually both alive and dead.
So I guess I'm a necromancer, I guess?
No, you're a revenant.
Ah.
Yeah, someone who comes back from the dead.
Anyway, Callan, you need to get Maddie and Snarky and the rest of them.
They'll come as they wish. I'm sure. I have seen worse. I guess we shall begin. So hello everyone. I am Callan. I am a pagan, also a socialist, but we'll keep that to the side for now. And these are my lovely co-hosts. We are currently missing one because, well, the Christians decided to raid his state, and he's having to fight them off right now. Oh, and Tria Tial is here. Welcome, Tria. So, yeah, with that said, let's begin with some basic theology and pagan stuff. So, any comments before we start here? Before I throw out the first little poisonous dart of a question?
Not exactly.
I got nothing.
All right, so let's first go over, I guess, what we mean by when we say pagan.
Well, I think instead of saying pagan, because that has connotations of, well, I say the term pagan is not specific enough. I think the term that we should be using, and that I actually like seeing people use, is the term polytheist, because that is more straight to the point as to what we believe in multiple gods.
I agree, except for me, pagan carries more of also a cultural connotation.
Okay, yeah.
Sort of like the same way, like if someone is an atheo-pagan, for example, I kind of still consider that under like sort of a branch of paganism in a way, because culturally they're going through the motions, they just simply don't have the belief. Whereas if I'm talking theological, then I'm going to usually denote the polytheists, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. But
yeah, pagan is generally much more of a cultural word to like describe our personalities and such.
Yeah, but I think it's also important that most pagans, at least I think so, are actual polytheists, and atheo-pagans are a vast minority. I think.
Yeah, which
I could be wrong on that.
With our sort of presence now within sort of this wider sphere of the community, people will have to be careful, because pagan doesn't necessarily imply polytheist.
Yeah.
There are some monotheistic Wiccans, for example, who view it. It's called the goddess movement, for example, and the goddess movement is basically about reclaiming femininity in the face of this monstrous thing we call a patriarchy.
Yeah. And also, I'm not entirely sure about this, but one can make the argument that pantheism is a form of monotheism.
I mean,
Depends on the type of pantheism, because
Of course.
some people claim that all gods are just the same god presenting themselves in different ways. And then I've seen others who view it as they're a bunch of different energies that have been given different names across different cultures.
which is in essence, when you kind of say they're different energies given across different cultures, at that point, it's pretty much the same God.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, if you, what
yeah.
they call energies, we would call more essences. So, like, different gods have a different essence about them. Essence, by the way, is a term I'm using as a term in the Aristotelian sense,
and is derived from the Greek word ousia.
Mm-hmm. Primarily the Greek word ousia. There were some other words that they also have. I haven't read Aristotle's stuff in a little bit, but ousia is primary substance, to be exact. So we can get into that spiel a little bit later when we have a separate video for Aristotelian theology.
Yeah, because Aristotle is awesome. I just have to say, I really enjoy Aristotle, especially his metaphysics and his politics. But yeah, that's a subject for another video.
Pagan is the original. Okay, yeah, actually, yes, you're correct, Trans Gamer Girl. That is the original usage for pagan. In fact, pagan itself, the word, it comes from the Latin paganus. And paganus is a country person. Because the way it worked is that Christianity became the religion of the elite, but the peasants and the people who were actually feeding you, for the time being, were still pagans. They still practiced the old religion, so to speak, because, well, if you have a harvest, you're going to want to pray to the harvest god.
Yeah, the way that Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire and even other areas that were later converted by the Catholic Church was it was always the higher up people first, and then it gradually spread to the lower classes.
Except for, of course, in the case of Iceland, in which they literally blockaded the country and threatened to starve them to death if they didn't convert.
I was not aware of that.
I wasn't
terrible.
either.
Something like that. Yeah, they basically threatened Iceland, from what I recall. But yeah, so that's basically. In fact, this is where we actually get the term heathen from. The word heathen is actually an Old English word, heathen, which was used to refer to generally non-Christians. It's actually the same exact word, definition-wise, as paganus or pagan. Of course, nowadays we mostly use this to refer to pagan traditions that are Germanic.
Yeah, or I've also seen people refer to Slavic paganism as heathen as well.
Yeah, and that's because there was a lot of fun fact about Russia, the Rus weren't originally a Slavic tribe.
Yeah,
they were Vikings.
Yeah.
They were Vikings. They were Vikings who interbreeded with the Slavs and formed Russia eventually. Of course, it took a heck of a long time. The original country, I think, was called Gardariki, which is like realm of like this yard, something like that. I have to look. I'm still new to Old Norse, by the way.
I need to refer back to CK2.
But let's see. The term polytheism is conceptually quite elegant because it can be applied in various theological. I agree with that statement. Of course, it also depends on how you define the gods.
Yes.
The way I tend to like to go about defining the gods is actually the same way that Ocean does. Basically, the gods are disembodied consciousness, inspire great awe, and are more powerful than minds that are the product of evolution.
Because I come from a largely Hellenic and classical background, I think of the gods uh, as more in more of a later Platonic, or what
Mm-hmm.
people refer to as a Neoplatonic way of referring to the gods as basically
Forms.
units.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Units. Uh, with regards to various thinkers like Proclus and Porphyry and Iamblichus and Damascus.
And that will be its own series, by the way.
Yes.
This is mostly to get out some of the sort of the basics of who we are, what we do, and whatnot. So let's go into some particular traditions here.
Mm-hmm.
My traditions are heathenry, Sumerian, and I'm actually also thinking about adding Yoruba. Not quite sure on that though. But Yoruban religion is actually quite fascinating because, well, it was actually the religion of the slaves when they came over from when they were forced over to America, and that's why a lot of Caribbean religions, and even with Caribbean traditions, will actually use the Orishas. So they'll call them saints. In some cases they'll call them saints. In other cases they'll call them loas, and various others. But it's basically they would be referred to as folk Catholicism,
Mm-hmm.
or basically a synchronization of Catholicism. Which I heard a really good funny story from a friend of mine, where there was apparently this black woman who got sick of these white people being always harassing her. So she played a trick to keep them away by convincing them that she was actually had been alive for 200 plus years. And that got them to stay away because she is a witch.
I've heard similar stories with regards to a syncretization of Catholicism with deities from the Mesoamerican tradition. I'm not well versed in this area of history, but I know that at least one, if not more, deities from Mesoamerican or Native American traditions became Catholic saints. And there's argumentation that this kind of syncretization was prevalent in Europe as well. Some gods became sort of subsumed as saints in order.
Yeah, we see that with Bridget, actually.
Wasn't there a syncretization of a Cernunnos-like deity into one of the other deities into one of the other saints?
Could be. We'll have to ask King Ghetto. He's our Celt here.
Yes.
But I do know that with Brigit that was the case. Saint Brigit is actually a goddess named Brigit who was associated with healing and fertility. And by the way, usually it's actually better to say, when we talk about the gods, we'll tend to want to usually talk about them as associated with X or Y rather than of X or Y, because the gods are just purely functionary. They're their own being. Like saying Odin is a god of wisdom is really just saying Odin is wise. He's associated with wisdom.
Or it could be
but he's not just wisdom. He's just not functionary of wisdom.
Yeah.
He's his own being.
And one way, and one thing is that a problem I usually see is when people say a deity is a god or a goddess of X, that's in a way limiting themselves. And I come from a largely Hellenic background, a largely Hellenic tradition. So the idea of the gods being limited is not is not historical, and it doesn't philosophically make sense either, because if they are the highest beings, then and if they produce the various qualities of in the world, then how could they be limited by said qualities?
And
Yeah,
what I hear when I hear people say that a god is the god of a specific thing is I tend to think of the atheopagan way of saying that they're an embodiment of that one aspect and that they're not actually an entity that controls that aspect.
right. So that is why it is better, rather than saying Odin is some god of wisdom or Thor is some god of lightning. You can say Thor and Odin are associated with these qualities. Rather, that doesn't mean they couldn't Thor couldn't throw a lightning bolt at you, though I doubt he really would. It's just not really how the gods tend to operate. But what it means is that these are to be interpreted sort of as symbols describing some particular personality or aspect of said god within their cultural context, if that makes sense.
The way I see it is that the gods have control over these aspects instead of those aspects having control over them.
Yeah,
Right.
Again,
that's what I was trying
because they produce, and things that one produces are not limited by the producer. It makes sense in that sort of philosophical framework. Again, I usually come at this from a later Platonic or Neoplatonic perspective, and there are lots of intricacies to this philosophical system that we'll get to in a later video.
A later video series, because
yes,
we can't just boil all this down into one huge episode. We'd be here forever.
Yeah.
And then some. Yeah. See, when it comes to like functionaries, I think probably the closest that I could think of in terms of like gods that we're seeing as almost purely functionary are some of the Sumerian gods, but even it's more associated with. Like I like Nanshe, who's the goddess of social justice. I just love that there's a goddess of social justice, or associated with social justice would be a better way. All right, let's look through some of these. The art, cool. Awesome. And the Ubanda, that's one of the many traditions. Ubanda, Santeria, and there's just so many little sort of like synchronized Christianities that have been. I also recently read about an issue where they were having a bunch of Christians trying to exorcise practitioners of Santeria. And I need to look more into that because Christians. So I guess that could be another topic for us right now. And that is, what are our issues of Christianity?
That's going to be a great issue for us to cover.
Well, I've explained this to various people, and from a purely theological or philosophical perspective, the issues with it's not just Christianity but monotheism itself, that if there is only one God, then you either have in order to explain other religious experiences, you will then have to either relabel those other experiences as being just purely manifestations or aspects of the one God, or the other way that you could go about that is by just exclaiming that those other religious experiences are inherently demonic and should be suppressed. So because of these things, monotheism is inherently exclusionary and generally doesn't lead to religious pluralism as much as polytheistic faiths do.
Right. So yeah, in short, basically what Christians tend to do is they tend to take our various spiritual experiences and relabel them. Atheists simply deny them.
which is kind of an interesting way of relabeling them.
It really is, but basically, yeah. And when we say denying it outright, just in case some sort of literalist comes along and says, well, we're not denying them, we just assign them. Yeah, we realize you're just assigning them to natural causes. But yeah, they either just relabel them and try to push their narrative because, well, that's what they have to do as monotheists.
Yeah.
Which is kind of why monotheism makes no sense if you actually study the various world's religions.
Yeah.
Particularly in native traditions, and there are some which are actually like somewhat solid ground. I can't think of them at the moment. Like some branches in Wicca, they see it as sort of like you have the goddess who is the unmoved mover. From the goddess, these sort of various little avatars come into being, and so. But at that point, really, what you're dealing with is the divine, more like blood, more like a substance that the gods are made out of, rather than like this huge conscious entity, if that makes sense.
Which I generally disagree with because I
disagree with it too.
Because the ancient Roman philosopher and politician Cicero, in his work On the Nature of the Gods, outlines an objection to the Epicurean school of thinking. And one facet in Epicureanism is that the gods are made of a material substance, which doesn't really make sense because material is inherently limited. And if the gods are not limited, then it just makes sense that they would then not be made of material or substance. And because they are the most powerful beings, they are the ones who would produce substance then.
Which brings us to our next point, which is immaterial. And the fact that, yes, we do believe immaterial things exist.
Sorry, you said immaterial? Okay. Yeah, I often see or make the argument that Aristotle makes with regards to the prime mover, that for one object to be moved by another object, that object needs to move itself, and there must be some immaterial force within which would then bring about the change of position, and that is a way of determining the difference between the material, between sort of animate and inanimate objects. And so you can then infer the existence of immaterial immateriality.
Someone wants to know, Evans wants to know, what do we mean by not limited? Would you like to take that one?
Can you take it?
So, yeah, I'm not. So basically, omnipotence. Not limited by material. In other words, they don't have to stick within the material realm.
Yeah, and in the sense that we can infer that beings of a higher level exist because of the hierarchy, which is inherent, that in order for there to be material, there must be beings which would create said material.
Yeah. So basically, in order for material to be created, there has to be something above that material to create said material.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see what else is.
And to be completely clear, believing in a deity or a set of deities does not inherently mean that you believe that those deities created matter.
Of course.
Some deities just like to play with matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're just imposing their own perspective or their own worldview onto others without taking into account of the others' worldviews.
They're trying to use their own particular religious definitions and impose them on us. And generally, that ends up with them calling us demon worshippers or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which seems par for the course of Christians these days.
Now
I've definitely met plenty like that.
Which the funny thing is, if demons exist and their God is omnipotent and omnipresent and all-encompassing, then by our definitions, their God must be in control of those demons in order to remain God.
Faithless, we have a question in the chat from Faithless Southerner. Would the gods be able to limit each other? I think that the answer to that question would be no, and this can be inferred from the Platonic dialogue Euthyphro, where Socrates criticizes Euthyphro for literally believing in conflicts amongst the gods with regards to, for instance, the Homeric conception, and it would just generally not make sense because the gods would not be jealous. They don't need anything. So they don't require anything to exist because they exist because it is evident that they exist. So they don't require nor need anything for which would then create conflicts between them. So it would just make sense that there would be no conflicts, and that conceptions of divine conflicts would mostly then be in a metaphorical or an allegorical interpretation.
So basically, because they're higher beings, and higher beings don't need anything else to exist, they don't have any interest in having conflict with each other.
No, they don't.
Hello.
Is that you?
Hi, Kingetto.
Kingetto, good.
Sorry about all this. It's been rough doing all this. I've had to get through a lot of stuff.
That's fine.
Hey, you're cool.
Is
So,
my mic working okay? Can you hear it?
you can
Sounds
hear it loud
fine.
and clear. So introduce yourself and give us your definition for the gods.
Okay, I'm Singhetto, and a Gaulish Polytheist, and basically, I like the term that I like how Dylan uses it. Basically, a disembodied mind of great power. It's generally the one I prefer to go with.
Kingetto?
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Okay, it didn't work. Okay, sorry about that. It's hard right now. I'm Kingetto. I am a Gaulish Polytheist, and can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. And I prefer to go with Dylan's definition of a disembodied mind of great power.
All right, and you want to explain some other stuff about your tradition?
1 second. Anything specific at the moment? What specific question? What specific questions would you have, or what would you like me to cover, basically, because there's a lot of stuff to cover.
There is. So, for one, I guess we can go into a little bit of the historical stuff. So, within our traditions, there are various sort of movements. Some people just seek to revive these religions. Others seek to do a more sort of direct historical continuation. We call the ones that want to sort of just revive revivalists. We call the others reconstructionists. I'm a reconstructionist when it comes to my various traditions. Others might not. And by the way, these terms aren't mutually exclusive, and you can be both a revivalist and a reconstructionist, technically.
Yeah, I tend to be a combination between the two. I like to take the old traditions and continue them in my own way instead of completely recreating them in as historically accurate of a way as I can.
Because oftentimes we wouldn't be able to go about these things because there aren't enough of us to make great sacrifices of oxen in the grand temple in the town square, because that's just simply not a thing in this modern world of ours.
Also,
human sacrifice.
Oh yeah, that sounds.
No, great. So much we could help pick society. Okay, no, I'm not going to. We're not going to get into the debate.
No advocating violence. No advocating violence on
We're
YouTube.
not-
It violates the terms of service.
We're not getting banned today.
Yeah, no, don't
want to get banned a week into our YouTube channel.
Of course not.
Creation.
So we'll let Thomas take this one first.
Well, in terms of infinite regress, I'm thinking of that not necessarily in terms of creation, but mostly in terms of Aristotle's argument for the prime mover, because he does go into an infinite regression. However, it seeks to describe a finite action. Apologies, I'm just trying to gather my thoughts as I'm saying this.
That's fine. I can answer the question if you want.
Yeah, well,
if you want,
I personally need to reread that particular section in the physics where he goes into that, but it was convincing for me, at least.
So basically, the way we get past that is you have the prime mover, and the prime mover is simply where all things have to sort of stop. So like in heathenry, we have what we call the order. So the first law which basically determines the course for it's the first cause. It's the first thing that brought everything into existence. Now we interpret that as a being, so to speak. But if you're an atheist, you could still you can interpret that as a non-being, in some sort of randomized processy bringing the universe into creation. Which is all to say, basically, unmoved, mover, whatever it is. And yeah, that's how we deal with it. Anyone else want to handle that?
I mean,
Well, I'm not sure if this is entirely correct, but this has sort of been a working sort of hypothesis or idea of mine, is that each of the gods themselves are prime movers for the action or the quality that is associated with them and that they produce. Now, a question that I have often asked myself is if multiple deities have similar associations, then does one overpower the other, or do they share this sphere of influence, or do they both share a sphere of influence over the same quality? I'm not entirely sure how to go about that.
Okay, that works. Basically, you have infinite God, so really you don't avoid it. You bite the bullet, so to speak. Wooter asked, what defines them as gods as opposed to being a very advanced life form? So the answer to that would be simply that they are more powerful than evolved minds. As for them being a life form, as an animist, saying they're a life form, I have no issue with that. Animism is basically the idea that everything has sort of a spirit to it in various different amounts. And that, so that would include the gods as well.
it would also be excluded because generally they're defined as non-physical and as they can inhabit physical things, but they're non-physical on the base level.
That too. Yes.
Again, like I explained previously, the argument that Cicero makes on the nature of the gods is that the gods would not be made of matter because matter is limited and the gods are unlimited, so therefore the gods are not made of matter.
I personally think that the gods have to be limited in some sense, or else then you get to the issue with omnipotence and all those other ideas that are inherently contradictory. And then there's also the question of whether the gods can limit each other if they're all unlimitable.
If they're all what? Sorry, I didn't hear that last word you said there.
Unlimitable.
Unlimitable. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, again, I think Socrates in a Euthyphro makes a good argument that the gods could not be in conflict with each other, and I'm extrapolating the idea of limiting each other as the same as conflict, because conflict usually takes the form of a give and take relationship, and there's literally nothing that God X that God Y does not have, because God X and God Y are so they don't require anything for subsistence. They merely are. They merely exist in a somewhat metaphysical way, which would then allow for there to be no conflict.
But when we look at mythology,
Yes, and what I've usually seen is that those conflicts would then be merely metaphorical and allegorical, and depending on the specific context in which the conflict occurs.
Yeah,
I myself need to look further into the concept of mythological hermeneutics to go further in this subject matter.
As do I. What was I going to say? Yeah, you also have, like, for example, God's dying, which is also fun to interpret within that framework. I guess it would be sort of dramatic change or something of that nature. And all other sorts of stuff. Let's see. Does it rule out a non-corporeal life? Well, no. It's oh. Is this better?
And there's also a lot of background noise on someone's end.
Is it so? Is it like but I keep keeping mine muted. I don't. That's weird. Sorry, this is like the only place I can do this at right now.
Yes.
At least you're not doing it from Swamp Germany.
Yes, Triatil. Yes, that was the word I was looking for. That was the word I said. Hermeneutics, that's basically the study of interpretation.
Yes, pagan exegesis is a thing. And
I know.
basically getting meaning from pagan mythos, theological meaning from pagan mythos, hermeneutics. Okay, so let's see what other sort of fun question. How can the gods not be limited, but also be the source of one specific trait? What do you mean by that, Faithless Summoner?
I think he's referring to what I said previously, that the gods being in sort of my own sort of working idea. This is by no means solid. I have much to learn, as well as all of us have much to learn. But the idea that because they are each prime movers in their own way, that they would share, or that they would be one specific quality. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure how to go about that. That is a question that I've been pondering myself. I'd like to hear the rest of yours interpretations on this quandary.
Yeah, I personally believe that the gods are limited by each other and the laws of logic, which I understand that most of you don't agree with. but I
know,
feel like it.
most of us are in agreement with, in terms of like the laws of logic. You kind of have to be.
Mhm.
Because if you violate the laws of logic, then you basically, what you get is impossibility, which basically means in every possible world, there's no God.
Yeah.
Like, I can make Gorka. He is the Omni-Devourer. He is omnipotent, omnipotent, and omniscient, and he also devours everything and kills it. That God, we can definitely say, does not exist.
Are you referring to Sebastian Gorka?
No, I just actually came up with that name randomly because I was thinking Slavic languages for some reason.
I was thinking of the Dragon of Budapest himself there. That's a reference for all of my the Grey Wolves who may be listening, who are probably not. Anyway,
you never know.
So I personally believe that the gods have control mostly over their own little domain of like laws of nature or something like water or love, either romantic or sexual, and all those fun stuff. And I think that they can sometimes share their power with each other, like share domains that they have, and then that's where they come into conflict because they have different what's the word I'm looking for? It's different. They have different goals.
Different interests, you mean?
Yeah, different interests. And I feel like that's where lots of the conflict in the world comes from, because it was a group of gods trying to shape an existence together who didn't all completely agree. So now it's kind of a shithole.
I view the God.
In great lines with what I have myself as well.
For me, I view the gods as, I feel like different pantheons has different tribes.
Yeah.
Kind of like within the same within like sort of the Norse thinking of, like you have the Aesir, you have the Vanir, and then you have the Thursar. Well, for me, I would simply extend it. Well, you also have this tribe of Greek gods called the Olympians and the Titans. And then you have the Yoruba gods and then the Sumerian gods, all within sort of their own little domain or tribe.
Yeah, I think that's...
Or you can be Inengard and Unfengard, even.
Yeah, I think that's something important to point out, because something I sometimes hear with regards to saying that I'm a pagan or I'm a polytheist is that, which pantheon do you believe in? And I think that
pantheon is a bit arbitrary.
Yeah, it's arbitrary, and it neglects the actual historical record that no one only believed in their set of gods, as far as I'm aware.
Between almost all cultures, there was mingling and trade of their religions. So, like, you see lots of Islamic influences in later Norse heathenry because of the trade that
you see some Islamic.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't... But anyhow.
But then you also see the way that the Gauls and the Celts interacted with the Romans and the way that the Romans interacted with the Greeks. And they all just sort of mingled their ideas together to try to broaden their understanding of the gods.
Yeah, you see shrines or temples to Isis all the way up in Great Britain. You see temples or shrines to Hercules, or Heracles rather, in ancient Pakistan and India. You see temples of Mithras in what is now France or Gaul, and you see just a whole slew of this very much religious pluralistic
Yeah, and this even
notion.
And this even happened with when Christianity was starting to spread. Like, for example, we have found statues of Christ right next to statues of Thor.
Yeah, many Christians have, like historical Christians, incorporated worship of Yahweh in with their worship of the other gods that they already believed in.
That still happens today. Like you can look at tribes and stuff and things like that, and that's a lot of the strategies they'll use actually to try to force their religion into them.
Yeah, I personally believe that a form of Yahweh exists, but I definitely don't worship him. But
yeah,
generally, I do. Yeah.
I'm a bit agnostic when it comes to does Yahweh exist, but that's just me personally. It would be interesting to look into, is Yahweh merely just a corruption of a Semitic deity, and by corruption I don't mean anything inherently negative. I just mean a change of how people perceived this one Semitic deity to being above all others, or being the only one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, looking back, the way that it happened was that Yahweh was originally a Canaanite deity, and he was introduced to the Israelites, and then by some means,
I think
the Israelites turned into a monolatrist society where they believed in all these gods like Baal, Kamash, and
you mean actually the head of the Canaanite pantheon was El. That's why you get Elohim.
Yeah.
Yahweh, from what I recall, the best experience of the best theory we have is that he was the god of like the Shashut tribe, and that he was then introduced to the Israelites from that way, not from Canaan.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd have to relook at the text, but I think that's how it happened. And then gradually, as the Israelites became more and more monotheistic, Yahweh just simply came about and kicked all the other gods out, basically.
Now there's an interesting question put forth by Faithless Southerner, who said, would the gods be limited by the laws of logic? Would any of
yes.
you?
Yeah, I would say yes. They have to be, because otherwise they can't exist in any possible world.
Yeah.
What about chaos, though? I'm curious. What do you guys think about? Would chaos be limited? Because that wouldn't make sense.
Chaos doesn't make sense.
I don't know a lot, or I don't really know as much about chaos as other deities.
I know chaos is chaos isn't really a deity. It's not sentient.
Yeah, I see chaos as being a lot more of. I see chaos in a much more atheo-pagan like perspective, where I see chaos being the embodiment of discord and, well, chaos.
Chaos is a fun thing to screw with atheists on, because you can be religious and be atheist, so long as you don't consider chaos to be like a god or something that's sentient. It's all like we all came about by chance and whatnot. That's kind of a fun way to mess with atheists.
There are lots of fun ways to mess with atheists, especially when you start talking philosophy.
That's true. Doesn't chaos automatically need to be limited by the laws of logic as well?
No, because it's chaos.
I think that it's more like a concept to describe something that is limited by the laws of logic.
It's kind of like the all in Wicca, which the all is basically this sort of huge amorphous mass that is not limited by the laws of magic, not laws of magic, the laws of logic. It just simply sort of is, and it's not able to be grasped by human minds. But it sums up the totality of like all the universes and whatnot. It's it's an interesting concept.
Yeah. I would also like to say that this may contradict my previous statement that the gods are unlimited, that the gods would be limited by the laws of logic, but in the sense that everything in the world is limited by the laws of logic and the laws of reason and the laws of science, because the world is what it is and things follow scientific principles. However, one can infer the existence of metaphysical beings through various philosophical arguments that we have touched on to some extent.
Yeah, justifying belief in gods will be definitely a separate fun little video to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I basically use experience to ground my belief. Others are okay with taking it as an axiom.
Yeah, I myself take it as an axiom, but an axiom that is inferred by both argumentation as well as experience, as personal experience on my end, but also reading the thoughts of others, specifically sort of generalization of the thought of Proclus, as well as some other ancient Greek philosophers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's most of where pagan theology actually, a lot of it comes from, because
the ancient Greeks.
Because the ancient Greeks managed to write some philosophical stuff down before the Christians came
and destroyed everything. I don't mean everything, but you know what I mean.
Although, granted, they're not. I mean, we have like a ton of Sumerian stuff as well.
Yeah, but
like the concept of the May.
Yeah. Now that's a question that's a thing that we should look forth or put forth in another video, specifically with regards to the myth of Enki and Inanna, because there's a lot of good stuff in there.
There is. I like it where Inanna destroys a mountain because the mountain won't bow to her. You can't get much more metal than that.
So more metal than what? Sorry, I blanked out for a second.
Destroying an entire mountain because it won't bow to you.
Yes. Yes.
Anyway, the way that I personally came to my beliefs was, excuse the dog noises, it was mostly personal experience, both from me and from some other people. And then I stayed...
personal gnosis.
Yeah. And then I stayed with the religion because I've seen the philosophical arguments that different people in the community have been putting forward, along with continued personal experience.
Until I came and screwed everything up. which is kind of an interesting thing because a lot of the pagans I meet online are ex-atheists.
I myself am an ex-atheist.
Oddly, I've never been an atheist in my life. I went straight from Christianity over to paganism, and before that, I had a few stints with theistic Satanism.
Of
Ooh,
course.
theistic Satanism. That we'll get Via to cover our Satanist content then.
I've never been Christian or any other sort of religious thing.
I grew up in a largely liberal, somewhat practicing Presbyterian household, and then I became an atheist when I erroneously believed that science could solve all problems, and that science is the number one source of all knowledge. And then I learned philosophy, and I started thinking of things in different ways, and that's a vast generalization of what happened.
I was barely an atheist at all, like sort of, kind of for like a little bit, and then kind of jumped straight in.
Yeah, no, I wasn't. I think one time I went and pretended to be an atheist just to see how I would do. I was awful, but it was fun, and I regret none of it. It's just like, especially the stuff I got to say to Christians. Just like that. But
Triatil, we're sort of answering your question now that well, in just a little bit more detail from my perspective, that it was primarily by reading Plato and by reading Plato and Aristotle, and especially Aristotle. His argument for the existence of the prime mover was rather convincing for me, and then just sort of extrapolating from there. And then a little while afterward, I had an experience when I was doing a study abroad program in Italy. Now coming in at almost 2 years ago now, which then affirmed my belief in the gods. So that's basically what transpired on my end.
I've had loads of experience. I was just taught to think of them all as demons. That was really it. That was the only explanation for all of it. Yes, I'm not joking. That was I've had this since I was like 5 or 6. And
yeah, I just simply never fell out of belief. So there's that. Always a pagan. And I mean, I guess I can kind of see how it would be confusing for the other atheists in the crowd and whatnot, in that they see you guys as going from a belief in no gods to a belief in all gods.
Which, I mean, that's basically what we believe in. Polytheism is not just a belief in many gods, but I make the argument that it's inherently a belief in all gods, because one of the ways that we perceive the gods is through experience, and the other way is through argumentative, logical thinking, like with regards to Plato and Aristotle and Proclus and other thinkers.
I see it
Not
more.
all.
We with how I experienced it was I went from a no belief in the divine to a belief in the divine, and so it doesn't really matter if you believe in one god or a dozen gods or 100,000 gods. It's the step towards the divine and the supernatural that is really the killer in that sense.
I think that what lots of people, lots of specifically atheists see it as is the spectrum from believing in no gods on one end to believing in all the gods on the other end. And right after believing in no gods, there's believing in one god, or believing in a limited number of or a limited number of gods. But that structure and way of thinking of things isn't very practical for much other than just annoying Christians saying, hey, you're closer to being an atheist than I am.
Yes.
Well, yeah. Well. That's an interesting segue to an interesting. Oh, yeah, Colin?
One thing that there's this atheist meme where it says, "When do you believe in?" And then it gives a list of like I don't know, a couple hundred gods, and then it says, if you can check all of these, then just check one more for why you do not believe in these gods, and then you get it to me. It's like, okay, I'll just write a huge check mark of all the gods I believe in.
Yeah. But what I was going to say is that some of the very first people in history to be labeled as atheists were Christians.
Well, Christians are atheists, though.
Well, yes, but in sort of a very strict linguistic or etymological way, because the term atheism comes from the Greek word theos, meaning deity, and using the privative a, which basically means an objection to, and Christians were the first people to inherently object to the existence of other gods, as opposed to the existence of their one god.
I would disagree, or I don't disagree that it was defined like that, but I disagree that they were the first people to say that, because I remember in Egypt, there's also a king who did that.
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
And also,
okay.
some of the Jews did that during their exile. Also, some of the Jews did as well during their exile. They held that belief, and that's. Okay, so I know that there's two of those, but Christians were the ones to do it on the biggest scale. I'll give you that, though.
Yeah.
I just love pulling that card out against Christians just to annoy the living heck out of them and say, "You guys are the real atheists. Screw you."
Yeah, basically. Well, except for the actual atheists.
No, it would be hilarious.
You're roboting, Callan.
It would be more radically, yes. Just sort of pull the card.
Can you try again, Callan? Because you're really roboting very badly.
Okay, is this better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I can't hear Callan at all.
Callan?
Yeah, I can't either.
Hello?
Yeah, there you are.
Are you okay? Are there things going on your end?
Let me see.
And he disconnected.
Yeah.
Oh, Callan? Oh.
Yeah, Callan reconnected. Disconnected.
Okay.
So I don't know where they are.
Okay.
Guessing there's a problem somewhere.
We'll handle that in due course. Callan is asking you to send the link again.
Okay, yeah, I saw it.
Yeah.
So,
I'll be away for just a second.
Okay.
Also, just one last thing. I'm gonna have to go in a certain amount of minutes, about maybe about 10 minutes or so. I'm not sure how long, but I'm gonna have to go soon. Sorry about that.
All right, no worries. I think we should be wrapping up as well if we can, because we've almost reached the 1.5 hour mark as well, which was what we were aiming for.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey,
Hi,
back.
welcome back.
I rose from the dead just like Jesus did.
Yay.
Now I'm going to tell you
So-
all not to believe in any other gods but me and rule the entire world through this holy kingdom. Feeling pretty good. Damn it, you're right. I forgot 3 days. How am I going to...
By the
3
way,
minutes is close enough.
Yeah,
By the way, we're in the script where y'all right now. Or are y'all even following it?
I don't think we're even following it.
I
We've
spent
gotten
10 minutes on that.
sidetracked so much.
I spent a whole 10 minutes of my life on that. I'm disappointed.
On
Oh, wow.
you spent 10 minutes on what? Sorry, I just got back.
On the script, I was sorry. I've been busy with all the other stuff I had to do.
That's fine.
But, so yeah. Alright, I follow no gods. What makes you think I follow you? Because I'm not a god. I am but a person. Trans person. So you have to follow me for trans blood.
Yeah, of course.
So what other subjects are we going to go over? Is there any other questions or anything?
I think we can does anyone have any other questions? I mean, Faithless Southerner have any other questions, or have we converted him to theism?
It would be great if we would.
I think he'd probably die first.
Yeah.
I think most of the people in the chat would probably die before following gods.
Probably.
Yeah, because most of our audience from the which we gained from the previous video are atheists.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah.
almost everyone here has come through means of Maddie or Mrs. Snarky or one of those other people.
Yeah, that's very much the case.
But
Triatail says, "Okay, I can deal with the trans blood. At least that one makes sense."
yes, I'm starting my own cult based on that.
I don't even know what that's in reference to.
I think I know. Being allowed not to swallow is scary.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Again, I have no idea what this is
We'll tell you
referring to.
later.
Yeah. I have a feeling we probably shouldn't say it on YouTube and get demonetized before we can even get monetized in the first place.
Okay.
But, I guess we should also talk about sort of what we see with the atheists that we deal with. What I tend to see is a lot of scientists.
Sorry. What, Callan? Your volume is a little low. Can you repeat what you just said?
I said, I guess we should also talk a little bit about what we see with the atheists.
What do you mean? What you see with them?
Exactly that. So what I tend to see with a lot of not so mature atheists is that they
the edgy 14-year-olds.
The amazing atheists, the Mr. Repsions, the terrible people like that.
But yeah, so I see a lot of scientism.
Yeah.
Like science is somehow the end all be all, and that's not a good. That's really stupid.
Science is a good way to measure lots of things, but when it boils down to it, you can't use science to prove itself, and you have to use other forms of philosophy to prove that science is a good conduit for proving things.
And
So that's where that's where things like personal experience come into play, because at its very base, you can't have science without experiencing what the results of an experiment are.
And until you get a good sense of what mathematics is, you really can't use you can't really use that kind of quantitative approach unless you know sort of the philosophy behind mathematics and what sorts of relationships mathematics tries to put forth.
Well, here's the thing: a lot of these atheists also, I think, to find that they're not so good about thinking critically in science, which is another thing that they're supposed to train you to do. They're more like methodological scientists. They know how to go through the scientific method, but they don't know why they should.
Yeah.
So if I throw like the problem of induction at them, or various other of these problems, it's like they have no clue. They'll just run away or shout insult. And that's the other thing. They love resorting to insults.
Religion is a mental illness. You're just hallucinating.
Of course.
I get it all the time on Tumblr, and I have 4 fucking followers.
I unlike a lot of you, I generally steer clear from those Twitter shit threads.
What?
I jump straight in head first.
Oh, I'm usually starting them. I
usually start them nowadays, but I have like very little patience for that form of atheism now.
Yeah,
because I got really abused by them.
Yeah,
and that abuse has kind of made me a bit jaded.
Yeah, but with regards to the reasons why one should go about a kind of methodological science, I recommend reading the various works by René Descartes. He goes into a lot of detail of with regards to experience and things of that nature.
That he does. What time? Okay. All right, so it's been about an hour. And
77 minutes.
Yeah, so I guess now would be a good time to end it. Are there any closing questions from anyone?
Or any closing thoughts from anyone else, not specifically questions?
Yeah. Cricket.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have to go soon, so.
It was great.
I think that I might be able to believe in the gods if it were only philosophical and logical arguments, but I wouldn't be able to worship them or follow them. I don't really like the term worship because it just seems really demeaning.
Yeah.
But
a better term would be veneration.
Yeah.
Because the ancient Greek philosopher Porphyry stated that one of the main reasons why we pray is to simply venerate the gods who have, in whatever regards have given us not just our lives but our entire universe. And I think that's that's generally what I do with my prayers. They're less about asking for specific things, because I don't think that's what the gods are there for. I think that the primary purpose of prayer is supposed to be for veneration.
Yeah, when I hear the term worship, I think, bow down to me, mortal.
Yeah, that's not quite how.
Yeah, nice death growl there.
Thank you. I've been practicing for 5 years now.
Good.
All right. Well, then no major questions in the chat, so I would say let's wrap it up.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Thank you
It's
all
good.
very much for watching.
And please
There-
plug us everywhere, because we're hungry for views.
and it's generally just a good idea to talk about these things and make ourselves more well known.
Mhm.
And we want money.
Yeah. if
Yeah,
you
it
want
would be
money,
nice
this
to
is
get to the
wrong
point
place
where
to-
we can start a Patreon or something.
If you
That
want
would
money,
be
this is
fun.
the wrong place to come. No. Alrighty.
Yeah.
So
Thanks, everyone.
thank you all
Bye-bye.
for coming. See ya.